And we're going to share my screens. So this week we are talking about strings and lists and dictionaries. So why in the world are we talking about strings and lists? First of all, why are we talking about lists this, new into class? And why would we talk about strings and lists in the same module anyway? Because the string is a list, short and simple. So we're introducing the concept of a string and we're introducing the concept of a list. Now, you're not going to have to know everything about lists. Could you unmute whoever is not muted? There we go. Anybody else who's not muted? Okay. So you're not going to have to know a lot about lists until later on in the course. We're introducing the topic tonight. So don't get caught up in, how do you do things with a list? Tonight's topic is really, let's talk about strings. And as part of that, we're going to introduce some other topics, but we're not going to go in depth into those. We are going to go in depth into strings. So what is a string? A string is a sequence of characters. Plain and simple. That's what a string is. Just like when you write down, a sentence, and that sentence is a sequence of characters, and that sequence of characters is meaningful to you and anybody else, hopefully, who speaks the same language you do. All a string is. There's not a lot of mystery to it. That's just what it is. It's a sequence of characters in a specific order, and we imbue meaning into those things when we read them back. So some of the things, the concepts that they're introducing is the concept of a sequence type. Well, a sequence type is just a type in Python that allows you to have a sequence of things. A list is a sequence type. So a string is in fact a list, but it's a special list. And it's special because it's immutable. And what that means is you can't change it. Once you have created a string, you cannot modify that string. Now you can modify that. You can take an original string and modify it while creating another string. But once a string is created in Python, you can't change it. And string is a basic type in Python. And for the most part, Python assumes just about anything is a string unless it absolutely knows it's an integer, a float, or a Boolean. Because remember last week, that's what we talked about types. We had string, integer, float, and Boolean. Python, if it doesn't know what something is going to assume it is a string. So it's important to understand what strings are and how to manipulate them. Because a lot of what you will find, unless you're doing a lot of scientific kind of programming, a lot of what you will find is that there's a lot of string manipulation that goes on when you are programming. There is. So a string is a sequence of characters. That sequence of characters has an order. So I'm looking right here right now in this string indexing. So I have a sequence of characters called Trish, and that sequence of characters has an order. That order is set, it can never be changed, and you can get at the individual characters in that sequence through something called an index. The index is just the number associated with it in that particular sequence. And I'll go out in just a second and we'll come up with a couple of scripts that kind of show what that is. But this is a good visual representation, and it basically says I have a string Trish and a space at the end, and T is associated with 0. So this string Trish with a space has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different characters, because space is a character, period is a character. And we'll go through the ASCII table in a little bit, but even if you don't think of space as a character, in Python it is. So there are 6 positions. Those 6 positions have characters in them, and each position has a unique index. The index will always start at 0. That's what the first index value will be in any list in Python, and that includes a string, because it is in fact a list. So the first index value will always be 0. The next will always be 1. The next will always be 2, and so on until you get to 1 minus the length of the string. So while this is 6 spaces, this would be 5 because it starts at 0. This is oftentimes something that can confuse students. So I'm going to do a quick example. I'm just going to call it simple string. Okay. Add my configuration. Python. There we go. Okay. As soon as I type, it's going to tell me that I don't have an interpreter. I've set this up in the settings, and I still don't know why it is not setting this for me automatically. Anyway, there's now a Python interpreter. So I'm going to have a string, and I'm going to call that string name. Now, name is a variable. I know it's a variable because it's on the left-hand side of a single equal sign, and on the right-hand side of that single equal sign is some value. Now, in this case, I'm just making this a little easier to read here. In this case, name is going to equal Lisa. Now, you'll notice a few things right here. Lisa is in quotes. That's a sure sign that something is a string. Okay, if it's in quotes in Python, it is a string. Now, Lisa has 4 characters, and I can look at, I can do a couple things with my name. I can print my name. So if I run this right now, I'm going to get my name. Name is Lisa. Well, that's all fine and good, but it kind of doesn't do anything for what we're talking about right now. What we're talking about right now is how a string is a list and how I can get at information inside the string. So I can actually look at each character individually, and I can do that by this. Okay, so I just want to make sure everybody has, just making sure everybody's on mute. So what did I do here? Well, I didn't change Lisa at all, just to say. And now I'm just going to print this thing that says name open square bracket 0, close square bracket is, and then I've got a dot format name of 0. So this isn't something that I've seen before. So what is it? So I right now, if I look down here at the console, it says name of 0 is L. And that's kind of how you read this. Name of. So, and that's just giving you kind of terminology to think about it. So a square bracket, so a variable followed by a square bracket is telling Python that you are expecting that the variable is a list. So it's saying, hey Python, name, I'm thinking name is a list here. I want to get at a specific value in that list. And the specific value is going to be at a given index. In this case, that index is 0. And then because everything has to be balanced, I have to close it with the square right bracket. So what I have said here is, Python, from name, give me the element at position 0. Position 0 is the first position, which is L. So I can do this again for 1, 2, and 3. Now I'm not going to do 4 just yet, and I'll do 4 in a second, and I'll show you what happens. But right now I'm just going to have 1, 2, and 3. So what's going to happen when I run this? Well, what's going to happen when I run this is name of 0 is L, name of 1 is I, name of 2 is S, and name of 3 is A. So we can see that this is 0, this is 1, L is 0, I is 1, S is 2, and A is 3. Now I'm kind of going over this slowly because this is a place where a lot of students start to have issues because this is the first time they will have been introduced to the concept of a list, to the concept of an index, and this whole strange thing of it starting at 0. And that throws off people sometimes. Don't get thrown off, okay? It's just where it starts. There's no rhyme or reason to why they said it was starting at 0 and not at 1. It simply does. So what happens if I make a mistake and I'm like, well, but Lisa has 4 characters in it, so I'm going to see what's at 4. So let's see what happens. I'm going to run this, and all of a sudden, I get this. Index out of range. This means that you have stepped off the end of the list. There's nothing at 4. This is something that a lot of students see in the beginning, and that's because Lisa has 4 characters, so I'm going to start and go 1, 2, 3, 4. When they get to 4, they get this issue. This issue probably means that you didn't start at 0, or that you thought it was too long. So this is something to keep in mind. Don't get upset about it. This is just, it's all it's telling you is you went too far in the list because it starts at 0. So if you're getting this when you are doing your assignments, then you probably need to go back and see where you're starting your indexes. So let's see. Keep going. This is more about indexing, and we'll do a couple of challenges tonight, and then we'll walk through the labs. I realized after a couple people mentioned it, but I didn't really walk through the labs last time. I walked through one of them a bit, and then I didn't walk through some of the others. So we're at least going to talk through them. Okay, so I think a string can be concatenated. What in the world does that mean? That means you can add them together. And there are kind of different ways to do it. But you can basically say, let's just do name 2 Millie. So I want to, actually I'm just going to do this. So I want to concatenate two strings together. Well, how do I do that, and why would I want to do that? Well, I want to concatenate strings because sometimes I want to make, make a new string with the result of 2 strings. So if I have name and then I'm going to have actually we'll do this. We'll do first name and then we'll do last name. And I want to print well, what in the world can I do here? Well, there's a couple things I can do. To show you what straight string concatenation is, actually, let's do this. And we'll do name equals first name plus, I'm going to add a space, plus last name. So, and then I'm going to do dot format, whoops. Okay, so what have I done here? Well, I've got a variable named first name. I know it's a variable because it's on the left-hand side of a single equal sign. You're going to get tired of hearing me say that over the next couple weeks. But by the time I stop sometime next week, you will never have any doubt about how to look at a variable in Python. So first name is a variable. Last name on line 2 is in fact a variable because it's on the left-hand side of a single equal sign. First name, the value is Lisa, and last name, the value is Shannon. Well, I want to create a brand new string that has Lisa space Shannon as the value. Well, I can do that by adding strings together. And I can do it, you'll see it. I've got a plus sign here and a plus sign here. This is called string concatenation because it's not an arithmetic operation. You're not adding 2 plus 2 to get 4. What you're doing is you're basically butting 2 strings up against each other. Or in the case of line 4, 3 strings. So I have first name, which has a value of Lisa, which is a string. Then I have this quote space quote. That in itself is a string. It's just a space, but it's a string. And then I have last name, which is in fact another string. So I am basically concatenating 3 strings together to come up with Lisa space Shannon. So let's run this and see what happens. And it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Full name equal first name plus last name. Oh, I didn't give it a space to put it. That would help. Okay, so you'll see my full name is Lisa space Shannon. And I can do that because I can take strings and concatenate them. So this is something that you're going to want to remember as we go on into some of the challenges. Because one of the things you're going to be doing is you're going to be concatenating strings together. We're going to be using some escape sequences, things like that. So, and that came up because of this concatenating strings. So, I'm just reading this. Okay, So basically what I just did with adding things together is what you want to do here to concatenate strings. So on 2.12, you are not using input statements. Okay, it says there you do not use input statements. Do not provide a prompt, which means you're not using input statements. You're going to create a variable called log entry, and that log entry is going to add the strings together so they look just like that. So my city is going to be Houston, my state's going to be Texas. Log entry is going to be current time plus my city plus my state with, So you just have to add them together like we just added them together and concatenate. So that's all that 2.12 is. It's just adding the strings together. Now we're going to talk about list basics. Because I said that string is a, well, not because I said, but because Python strings are actually lists, the string sits in a container, and the container is called a list, and it is a specific type in Python. It is a collection, because that's what you have in it. You have in a collection of things. So a list just is a collection of things, and a string happens to be a very, very specific type of a list. So a string can only contain characters, and it's immutable, so it can never be changed. So here they're just talking about index values, and they're going beyond what we were talking about just a minute ago when it comes to strings only. So they're talking about the greater concept of a list here. But you guys don't have to really delve into really deep into lists. We're going to do that later. Excuse me. Here they're talking about initialize the list of short names. So basically you're not doing an input here. What they want you to do is they want you to do this right here. That's what they want. So you're just going to initialize a list, which the left square bracket and right square bracket. Initialize just means, Jake, that you are going to populate it with something. Okay? That's all it means, is that instead of it being empty, it's going to have something in it. So in this case, it's going to have in it that these three names, Gus, Bob, and Zoe. So you're going to initialize the list by giving it values. So in this case, it's just going to be, here, I'll just show you this real quick. This is, what is it, 2 point. Okay, what's going on in the chat? So that's not quite it. I'm going to show you what it is in just a second. So I'm going to create, what is this one? Sorry. I'm going to, it's 221. So we're just going to do this one real quick. File, new, 221. Okay. So in this one, and I'm doing this just because, well, I have my own irritations with zyBooks, but so this is what it's saying. Okay, we're just going to put this in here as a comment. Okay, so it says initialize the list short names with strings. So we already know that short names is going to be our variable, so it's on the left-hand side of single equal sign. I am creating a list, and that list is going to have Gus, Bob, and Zoe. Whoops. And by the way, a string can either have single quotes or double quotes. So if I put something with a single quote sometimes and a double quote others, it's not changing the nature of the string. And then what it wants you to do is it wants you to print these out. So this on line 3 is an initialized list. So all I've done is I've populated it because I could have left it empty, but that's not what they want you to do here. So I'm going to print short, I'll do the first one. So why brackets rather than parentheses? So parentheses are used for functions like print, and brackets are used for lists. That's just the nomenclature of Python. That's just the way the people who developed Python said that it needed to be. And that's actually pretty standard. Lists are in Java and C++, they have square brackets. At least it's been a while since I programmed in C++, but I'm pretty sure they still do. So that's pretty standard amongst a lot of different programming languages. And the Python, the way an interpreter works is an interpreter's walking through the code and it's trying to figure out what it is you want to do. And so we as programmers have to give it information. And that information isn't just the fact that we have short names equaling Gus, Bob, and Zoe. At the program, at the actual level that the interpreter is running, the program needs to know what you're intending to do. So when Python is coming, let's say, to line 3, and it says, okay, I've got this thing called short names. I don't know what short names is. I have nothing in my memory banks around it. Okay, I've got an equal sign. That means short names has to be a variable. Okay, so far so good. Now, Python's going to then go to the next set of characters, and it's going to say, okay, I have a left bracket, left square bracket. That means I'm expecting a collection. I'm expecting a list. And so, based on the fact that it's expecting a list, it is going to act on the next pieces of information based on that list. And if something is amiss, it will throw up its hands and stop and say, sorry, you did something wrong. So if I do this, okay, and I try and run it, whoops, I'm not running the right one. Okay, let me change this, and let me go see. It screams at you. Yes. It screams at you. That's exactly what it's going to do. So if I run this, oh, it didn't scream at me. Probably because, okay. Lucky, I guess. Now it's probably something to do with this interpreter. I've used Pythons in many versions before, and there are versions of Python, like the 2s, where that wouldn't have allowed you to do that because it takes new lines extremely serious. But anyway, so that's what's happening in the interpreter. So when you're talking about a program, we as programmers are thinking, oh, well, I've got to make a list, and that list has to have 3 things in it. But the people who are programming the program, the people who are physically out there programming Python, are thinking about it differently. They're thinking about the fact that somebody has an input, Gus, Bob, and Zoe, somebody's given them a left square bracket. And that left square bracket means something. So that's why we have these different syntax in Python, and we're going to get to other syntax that we'll have in Python. And it's strictly to inform the interpreter what's happening. So we're not just talking about the data that people, like we're getting input from like we did last week. You're getting input from external to the program. From the perspective of the interpreter, the code we're writing is input. So we have to write that code properly to get it to do what we want. Okay. All right. So my main problem is this class so far, I don't understand the instructions for the labs. And that's not uncommon, Jake. So we'll go through the labs and we'll learn how to read them, because that is one of the things that most programmers, most especially new programmers, find difficult, is that they're not used to reading a problem statement in the way that program books write problem statements. Okay, well, we'll make sure we go through and read these things. So let me get through some of this stuff, and then we'll do that. Okay, so you have a list. You can add lists. Now, I'm not talking about strings here. I'm talking about lists. You can add or remove things from a list. You can create a list from nothing. So a list is an element, and it is a type, and that type has certain functions that you get with it from Python. And there's append, there's remove, there's pop, there's all kinds. There's sort, there's all kinds of things you can do to a list. And right here is a very, very short description of some of the things that you get. You don't have to write sum on a list. It can do the sum for you. You know, if you've got a list of integers, it can do a min and max. So there are really great things that come along with us. It's not a challenge. I'm not going to worry about that. Tuples. I pronounce it tuple. What are we talking? I'm sorry. Okay, so a tuple is just immutable. That's all they're talking about. A tuple is surrounded by parentheses. So basically what you're doing is you're creating something that's immutable. And immutable means you can't change it. Okay? So a tuple will have a length, and it will have a certain number of elements, and those elements are always in that order, and there's always those elements. I have never in Python used a tuple in programming. If I'm going to create something that is an ordered set of elements, I'm going to make it a list, because there might come a time when I want to change it. Not saying that there aren't instances where you might want to use a tuple. I have never used them, which is why I always have to go back and read this section and go, oh yeah, a tuple is a list that's mutable, that's immutable. Okay, so here they're just talking about initializing a tuple. For initializing the tuple, instead of using square brackets, you're just going to want to put the parentheses. So I'm not going to, let's see, do we have people with, okay. Okay, so we're just going to keep going. Dictionary basics, I'm only going to talk about the dictionary basics a little bit, because we're going to spend a whole class on just lists and dictionaries. So a dictionary is another form of a collection, and it is different than a list. It's different in that there are no indexes, okay? A dictionary is, you deal with what are called key value pairs. And if you've heard of NoSQL database, like MongoDB, they are dictionary based. So they have a key, which is an indicator of what something is, and then the actual value itself. And they're really, really good for certain things. If you have a lot of data, and that data is, well, we'll go into this more when we get into lists and dictionaries. There are certain things that just don't work with lists, that don't work very well. Anything that's associative doesn't work well with a list. You want a dictionary for that. But that's really all you need to know right now. You don't need to know a whole lot of stuff when it comes to dictionaries. And here they just wanted you to modify and add to a dictionary. So they've created a dictionary. One of the differences between a dictionary and a list, is dictionaries have curly braces and not square braces when you are creating them. They also don't have indexes, so you use square braces around the key. So what did they want to do here? Modify the car maker of Fiat to Italy. Sample output for the program. So basically what they want you to do in that one is this right here. They want you to modify an existing entry in a dictionary. So instead of saying students of Jessica equal A+, you're going to say car makers, square bracket, Fiat, close square bracket, equals Italy. And you got to treat them all as strings. So, common data types. Well, we talked about this last week, and we'll talk about it a little bit more now. You have two numeric types, ints and float. An integer does not have a decimal place, a float does. You have sequence types. You have strings, lists, tuples, sets, and dictionaries. We won't talk any more about tuples in this class. We will talk a lot more about lists and dictionaries, and we won't talk about sets. Sets is just another form of a list. So what you're going to concentrate on is strings. You're going to see a lot of them. Ints, you're going to see some. Floats, you're going to see some. Lists, starting in week 5, you're going to see a lot of lists and dictionaries. Okay. So this is just an additional practice because it's not graded. Type conversions. Okay. So maybe we want to convert one type to another. Maybe I want to convert an integer to a string. Or I want to convert a string to an integer. That very well could happen. How do I do that? Well, there's a couple of different ways. There's explicit and implicit conversions. An implicit conversion is what happens when you multiply or add an integer and a float. So let me do this. So, okay, let me set that up real quick. So if I want to convert, if I want to add an integer to a float, let's see what happens. So convert 1 equals 1 plus 1.1. Now, 1 is an integer. 1.1 is a float. So what happens when I run this? Well, I get 2.1. An implicit conversion is when you're adding, multiplying, dividing an integer and a float. Because what will always happen is you will end up with a float. That's an implicit conversion. Python, you never think about it. Python does it under the hood. You're never going to get an error if you try and add an integer to a float. You're just always going to get a float. It's not something that you ever have to deal with. That's an implicit conversion. And then there are explicit conversions. The explicit conversions are, how do I get something from a string to an integer, from a float to a string, from a string, an integer to a string? How do I do that? Well, there are functions that Python gives you to do that conversion. An int function creates an integer. A float function creates a float, and a string function creates a string from anything. So an int can take in another int, although I don't know why you would do that, a float or a string. But the string can only contain integers, and it can only contain one integer, or you'll get an error. A float, you can convert an int to a float. You can take in another float, which I don't understand why they do that. Or you can take in a string, and that string can have an integer, or they say fractions. And stir can take anything. Anything can be converted to a string in Python using the stir function. So why do you need these? Where do these come in? So let's take a look at 2.6.1. In 2.6.1, we are talking about, here they're just talking about average owls with the average owls, assign average owls with the average owls for zoo, print average owls as an integer. So the sample output for inputs 1, 2, 4 is average owls per zoo is 2, because we added 1, 2, and 4, and we took the average. And here you'll see that they come and they have average owls as 0. They take in 3 inputs, and then they do an int for average owls. So you just take the average. Okay, what is the sample output like? What does that mean? Where are you seeing that? Are you seeing that here? Okay, so when we're looking, here, let me mute people. Sorry. Okay, so when we're looking at, let's just take this one because it's not long. All right, so I have got a problem statement, and I've got what they're telling you is sample output for the inputs. And then, so if it says sample output for inputs 1, 2, and 4, so what this is doing is saying the line below is what I expect, what zyBooks is expecting to see based on an input of 1, 2, and 4. So if you're running your program, so let's do this. Okay. So what is this? 261. So if we're doing this, okay, and I am, let me do this real quick. So I have 3 inputs. I have an average owls variable. I have 3 inputs, num owl, zoo A, zoo B, zoo C. And then I'm supposed to do something, and I'm supposed to print int average owls. And I'm doing an int because I want to, they just want to take off the decimal place here. Okay. So assigning a value on the left to an input on the right equals, but it's asking you to put all of that together. That's where I'm lost. Okay, so let's take a look at this as it stands. Okay, and I'm going, you don't actually use a list for this. You don't have to use a list. You can simply do an average with just adding the 3 together and dividing by 3, because it's always going to be divide by 3. So let's do this. We're going to debug this real quick. So the average is going to equal C divided by 3. So that's all it is. That's all an average is, right there. And I'm showing you this whole thing so that we can walk through it and you can understand what they mean by for input 1, 2, and 3. So I'm going to hit the debugger, okay? And I am on this blue line, what you see up here. That's the line of the code that Python is waiting to execute. Python currently hasn't executed anything. If I go down to this lower part of my screen, I have two tabs. I have the Debugger tab and the Console tab. The Console tab is what we have seen before. It's just showing you what would come out to a computer console. Debugger is all the stuff that's happening under the hood that we don't see when we're just looking at the console. And you get this in Debugger. And by the way, I will continue to use the Debugger through these live coding sessions because it's something you're going to need as you continue on the class, and especially when you're trying to debug your project. So over here, I see these arrows. I see an arrow that's step over, step into my code, step out, and then run to cursor. I use step over a lot. Sometimes I use step out. So basically what this does is say, step over this line of code, execute it, and move on to the next line, but don't execute the next line yet. So it is now I'm going to step over line 1, and I see that this variable section here changes. What happens is I now have avg underscore owls, and it equals a float of 0.0. And that's what this little nomenclature is average owls is, and it gives you the type, so you always know the type. And right now it's 0.0. Great, now I'm on line 3, and I'm going to step over on line 3, and nothing looks, wait a minute, what happened? Well, all it's doing is it's waiting for input, because that's what this line tells it to do. So I'm going to put 1 in here and hit the Enter key. It automatically moves to the next line because I hit the Enter key, and you will see in PyCharm num_owls underscore zoo, A is 1. And then I'm going to hit 2 for line 4, okay? And I'm going to say over, so now num_owls zoo B is 2, and then what was the third? 1, 2, and 4. Okay. So I'm on line 5. I'm going to step over. It's going to wait. I'm going to put 4. So now I have 3 variables with data that came from external to the program, 1, 2, and 4. Yes, you're supposed to assign those values to the input, and then you're going to calculate the average, and then you're going to print out the average and as an int. Now the conversion part here is that these are all ints. That's important because when you use an input method in Python, it always assumes a string. That's right. So now I'm going to do the average. So now if I go over to debugger, average owls is now 2.33335. And so then I want to print it out. So if I had just print out average owls here, it would have been 2 point blah, 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 blah. But you can't have 0.3 owls, at least not in a zoo. So when I step over this, it does a conversion to 2. Now, this is for develop mode. So if you're looking here in zyBooks, okay, you have run, this is a challenge, not a lab. Okay. When you, so for the challenges, these are the values that zyBooks is going to use to put in for A, B, and C, and it expects you to have created the average for owls. Okay, so that's what this means. This is the data that zyBooks is going to do, and you have 3 values and 3 variables here. I'm not going to do the next one. It's just a follow-on. So the format function, you will have seen me use the format a little bit earlier. And format is pretty neat. Oh, what did I miss? Okay. Yes, you could have used the .f notation to remove the decimal. You could have definitely done that, Christian. Since we haven't actually got into the formatting, it was easier for them, and it was also something to talk about with the conversion, because converting a float to an int gets rid of the decimal place. It just chops it right off. But yes, you could have. No, there's nothing to apologize for. It's all good. So what we're talking about here now is how do you format a string? Well, because sometimes you don't want the variable the way it is, like we just saw with the int. So you want to be able to format, let's say put it like they're doing here, put a $sign in front of a value. But we don't know what the value in that variable is. So how do we do that? Well, they've got this great little notation in Python, and it's the dot format. And you can use it on any string. It doesn't have to be in a print statement. But you'll notice that that is a string. It's characters between two quotes. It's a string. Now, in here, we have these curly braces, open and close curly braces, and open and close curly braces over here. Those are basically placeholders to allow you to put information into the string. And what we're going to do here is we're going to use the variable number and the variable amount. So number, and this is positional. So the first, in the dot format part of this expression, the number will always be the first curly braces. The amount will always be the second. And that's because this happened first and this happened second. It's positional. And so I can do anything I want here. It's very, very flexible, and it's very nice, and you are going to have to use it now and future parts of this class. So it's like I said, it's positional replacement, and you can, here we didn't see any numbers. Here you can see that they're using numbers, 1, 0, and 2. So this is 0, this is 1, this is 2. So it always starts at 0. Everything starts at 0 when you're dealing with any kind of an order. And so the order for the format is hat is 0, cat is 1, and fat is 2. So you can use 1, 0, and 2, 2, 1, and 0 because they're positional. And the numbers indicate the positions. But you don't have to have a number. You can just have it straight positional. So these are different only in the fact that you can change the position. Excuse me. On the first one, it doesn't have to go in 0, 1, 2 order. It went in 1, 0, 2 order. On the second one, it has to go in 0, 1, 2 order because there are no numbers. And also there is name replacement here. I don't use name replacement that much. It's not that common as far as I know. I use this notation a lot. Let's see. I want to get on to the lab. Format specifiers. Format specifiers are important because they allow you to determine if there are going to be 2 decimal places after a float or 5 decimal places after a float. Precision, right here, is something you're going to want to remember because you're going to have to do it. not just in this class, but in later ones, they're going to say, they're going to expect, okay, I will get to the labs, Christian. They're going to expect format specifiers for floats. So I'm going to now, this is advanced string formatting. We won't talk much about this. I'll let you guys do that. String slicing is important because you're going to need to do that. Basically, you just pull index values out and create a new string. And you use this particular notation, so it's the string, and then the starting position and the ending position. Starting position can't be before a 0, so it can't be a negative number, and ending position can't be any longer than the length of the string minus 1. Okay, so I'll let you guys do that, and I'll be going until a little after 10. Finding and replacing. Finding and replacing is really easy. You have this replace method that allows you to just replace things in a string. So one thing to note is that it doesn't actually replace things in the existing string. It makes a brand new string, it does the replacement, and then Python gives you back that new string. You can find things in a string. You can count things in a string. Definitely look through all of these, all of the different functions that they have. I know I'm whizzing by them right now. Comparisons. This is the first time we're going to see the double equal operator. Okay, the double equal operator is basically saying, is what's on the left the same as what's on the right? So it's a double equal sign, and it is equality. Okay, so it's not assignment, which is a single equal sign. It's equality, which is a double equal sign. Are they exactly the same? Is what's on the left exactly the same as what's on the right? This isn't going to be huge right now, but when we get into if statements next week, it's going to be big. So we have to kind of start thinking about that. The other thing is this wonderful little in operator. You can say, is one string in another? And if it is, then you get a true, and if it's not, you get a false. So let's go splitting and joining strings. The split method is really great. You can take a string and make it a list based on a delimiter. So let's say it's a comma-separated file. You have comma-separated values in a file. You could split based on a comma, and it would create a list. And this is very handy, and it's something we'll be doing later. You can join lists together to make it a single string. So just like you can split them apart, you can join them back together. Let's see. Lab, name format. So let's talk through this lab. This is a fun one, and it's a little, I will get you started on it. So basically what the program has 3 inputs. First name, middle name, and last name. Yeah, this lab is a little bit tricky, and you should take it in baby steps. So, and this lab bothers me because it expects you to use if statements when you haven't learned them yet. And the school is well aware of this, and they're working on a particular issue. It is unfair. I can't tell you anything other than that, Dan. It is unfair. And we'll actually walk through this whole thing, and if I get yelled at, I get yelled at. But you haven't learned how to do if statements yet, so there's no way, given what you know at this moment, that you can do this right. without an if statement. So we're going to start with baby steps. Not a problem. We're going to start with baby steps on this. And basically what they're saying is we're going to be given a first name, a middle name, and a last name. And they want us to put out last name, first initial, dot, middle initial, dot. Okay? And this is really great if you always have a first name, a last name, and a middle initial. But when you start to get varying forms, it becomes impossible. So let's do this. And by the way, the only reason I'm going through this entire lab with you guys is because they're expecting you to know something that you can't know at this point. So this is what? This is lab 2.12. Okay. So if we start off, we're going to have first name, middle name, yes. Yes, they're going to expect you in this one to use else if and else statements. And again, that's why I'm going through the whole thing, because it's not right. So we have last name is going to be input. And then, well, let's see what the first thing is. The first thing is that they want it to be, the output, to be in the format of last name, comma, the first letter, dot, let me get this right. The first initial dot middle initial. First initial dot middle initial. Okay. So, comma, first dot dot. Okay. So that's actually pretty easy if we're just doing it for this. So I can say print, and I want my output format to be, it's going to be, I'm going to open with quotes. So it's going to be the last name, comma, and then it's going to be first initial dot, middle initial dot, dot, format, last name, comma, space, first name, middle initial, middle name. Okay, so what am I doing here? Well, I'm using that format method. I'm using our positional format, our positional formatters, and I'm doing exactly what they're telling me to do. So I'm going to have last name, first initial, middle initial. So the first initial I get by getting the first element out of the first name string with the 0. The middle name, I'm going to get the middle initial, I'm going to get the first element out of the middle name. So let's run this. Is that right? Yes, let's do this.
Can I ask a question?
Certainly.
So the input has to be put on one line. So you have 3 different inputs, and in order, at least for me, in order to get it to work, I had to put, so what I did was full name, input, enter full name, and then I did the name list, and then full name dot split, and then I broke it up that way because I couldn't get it to work since the way, like, because I looked at your previous video, and the inputs have to all be on one line. So when I looked at the video, it didn't really help me too much, and I had to go back and try to figure out exactly how I could put it in for one line.
Is zyBooks telling you that?
Yeah. So all the other labs and everything up to this point, you basically what you entered those inputs, you entered them on different lines. But for this lab specifically, you have to enter your input all on one line.
Okay. So let's give this a try. Okay, so this is going to be values of 0, like that. Okay, let's give it a shot. And so I'm going to have to do a dot split. Okay, and they're using spaces, right? They're using spaces. Okay. So what I'm doing here, and we'll see if this works, is I've got a variable named values. I'm going to input. I'm expecting a list, which is why I can do the dot split, and there's a space here. Okay? Because it's going to be space delimited. So I'm going to have spaces in between the first name, the last name, and the middle name. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, for my values, I'm going to have the last name, which will be the first value. I'm going to have values of 1, which is going to be the first name, but then I have to get the first initial out of it, and so that means that I have a multidimensional array that I'm dealing with, and the same with the middle name. So let's give this a try and see what happens. So I'm going to say, sorry. And I have Joey J.A. So that worked. Okay, and I can't tell you if this is actually going to work in zyBooks or not because I can't change zyBooks because all the professors use this. So now let's go on to the part that's a little more difficult. So if the input has the form first name, last name, the output is last name, comma, first initial, period. So this is where we have to have the if statement. So really, what I want to do here is I'm going to say if values, the length is 3, then I'm going to do it just like I was doing it. Then values is 2, then I'm going to do it, whoops, then I'm going to do it like this, because I won't have a middle initial. Oops. And I need to change this. Otherwise, I'm just going to say, why are we doing this? Okay. Question. Okay, great, Noah. So this is, if I run this, and this is the part, this is one of the reasons why I don't just kind of get you guys started on this one while we go through the whole thing. You don't learn if else statements until next week. So there's no way to get this one right. So this is right. And by the way, Noah, thank you very much for telling me about that input. Fewer people will be pulling their hair out on this one. So I'm going to run it again, and we're going to do a couple of different things. First, we're just going to make sure that this works. And now we're going to run it again, and we're going to say, okay, and then we're going to say not really, and invalid input. So I have what I needed. You don't need to have to do 22 strings, Christian. This should do, okay? You're just getting the input from the user. You're getting the input from the user. In this case, we're splitting it. And then we're going to output the values based on what we got in. And that's where these if statements come in. And we'll go through them more next week. And by the way, I'm going to be posting all of these. And change the variable names. Because if, well, they're labs, so you don't have to do that. Well, no, you do. Change the variable names. I'm going to get in trouble by saying this, but if your teachers go through and they see that everybody has the word values here, they're going to get suspicious. And I'm going to have to tell them that I gave you the answer, and then I'm going to get yelled at again. So just please go out and change those. Because, and I'm doing this because this is unfair to students to ask you to do something that you haven't learned yet. Okay, so that's that one. Why does this thing keep bouncing? Okay, all right. Ah, that's why. No? Okay. Oh, Dan, the video will be on my YouTube page. Most of the professors should be putting up the announcement. I'll be sending out an announcement tomorrow with all the links, but I have a YouTube page where all of the videos go, but the announcement will also have links to the scripts. So your professor should be putting that announcement out tomorrow, because I should have it out tomorrow. So let's go and read through the next one, okay? Count characters. So this one's a little bit better, and we're not going to have to go through all of it because there's no if-else statements here. This is write a program whose input is a string which contains a character and a phrase, and whose output indicates the number of times the character appears in the phrase. So N, Monday, is 1. So we know about the find for a string, okay? And that's what they're asking us to do here. They're asking us to use the find for a string. I'm sorry you were feeling pretty defeated, Noah. Unfortunately, that can really do it. So this one is, I'm just going to talk to it. It's all about using the find function on a string. So I know we went over it really quick, but go back and read a little bit more about that, because that's exactly what you're going to do here. That's all you need to worry about. Getting in the input, so you're going to have an input statement. You're going to use a find command on the string, and you're going to print out the output from that find command. We didn't talk about it at the beginning, Jake. It's kind of in the middle, and I went by it really quick. So you can go back. You can also take a look at find character in a string. Python has some really, really good, where is it? Python has some really, really good tutorials that are on its own site. W3 Schools has some good stuff, and it talks exactly about what you need to know. It gives you great examples, and then there's also the Python documentation itself. So look at what they say, but for me and for the students I have in my class, I think it's good for you to go out and look up things on the internet as well, because that's what I do in real life. As a programmer, I don't remember everything. I don't remember the millions of things that I have to remember when I'm writing a Python script. So I know basically what I need to do. And if there are things, if there's details that I don't remember, I go out and look them up. Because I don't think anybody should have to keep that. I don't think anybody should have to keep all that in their head. Yes, I Google everything too, all the time. So that's what this one is. You're going to use the find command. Creating passwords. Creating passwords is a little bit more difficult, but again, it is not like the one where you have the if statements. So this is something that you can absolutely do. 2.14 is something you can absolutely do with what you're given from zyBooks and what you're given from the reading and stuff for class. So basically, they want you to enter 2 words and a number, and you're going to store each in separate variables. So that's going to be 3 input statements, and you're going to output the 3 values into a single line separated by a space. So that's the first part. So how do you do that? Well, we kind of did something very, very like that here. Okay, we didn't put these in as inputs, but you could have made these inputs, and we're going to separate them by a space by concatenating them. Okay, so that's exactly what this is here. This is concatenation, and that's them telling you what you need to do here, except here you need to enter your color, a pet's name, and a number. So instead of 2 things, there are 3 things. So you just got to put spaces between them and output them like that. So here, output 2 passwords using a combination of the user input, format the passwords as shown. So this is basically just additional formatting. So, and we've talked about how to do formatting. So if I wanted to do something like this second password, or like the first password, if I'm here, let's see, where did we do this? It's type conversion. Okay, here we did some formatting stuff. That we did type conversion. There, we'll do it in here. So if I wanted to do, let's say put an underscore in between Lisa and Shannon, I could do a couple of things. I could do, let's say, password 2 equals whoops, my bad. Now that we know much more about the format, and I'm going to say first name, last name. So I'm just going to run this and print it out. This is concatenate, just to show you guys what they're talking about. This is all they're asking you to do here. They're asking you to use format to determine how to make things look different. So in this case, I have to put the print statement in. Password 2. Now I can actually get that output. So in this case, it's going to say Lisa underscore Shannon. So when you're looking at this lab and they're talking about creating passwords, what they're asking you to do is take in the 3 different pieces of information, and using some of those pieces, use that format to create new strings with the input that you gave in different orders. And this sometimes causes students a little bit of consternation, and that's just because they're like, but I've already used the number. But you can use the number as many times as you want. There's nothing that says that you can't use it 100 times. So don't let this one fool you. It's exactly the same. You're just using one of the inputs twice. So now it says output the length of each password, the number of characters in the string. So this is just building on what you've done, because now you're going to say number of characters in, and then you're going to give it the password, colon, and then you're going to give it the length. So that's the .len, because every string has a length. So what you want to do here is you're going to say number of characters in, and then remember when we were talking about that positional formatting. So this is, if you're doing a print statement, it's going to be that positional formatting. So it would be something along the lines of this. So it would be the number of characters in, and then you would do your positional formatting. And then we go on to Chapter 3. So does anybody have any other questions before we call it a night? Okay then, I'm going to call it, and I'm going to stop the recording, and I will have announcements out tomorrow. What's the name of your YouTube? I am Prof. Lisa here. Let me just paste this in here real quick. Oh, God. Let's go and become me, or become the version of myself. Switch accounts. There we go. Okay. So my channel. So this is my channel. It's Prof. Lisa. Okay. So for anybody who wants it, there it is in the chat. No problem. And I will most likely be here next Thursday. There are videos out on my channel from previous terms for the different modules. So if, in case I might have covered something in one of them more than I covered in this one, depending on the type of questions, feel free to go out and take a look at them. And I'm calling it. So everybody have a good evening. Oops, end.